With gratitude to my beloved grandfather, who no doubt gave his life and his work so that in November 2008, the United States of America would elect its first African-American leader, President-elect Barack Obama.
Yay! Obama.
Oh, this is a debut. It's never been heard before. Except in the car. Spring, 1947 in Albany, the small but bustling capital of New York State. Smack dab in the middle of the Red Scare. We got commies, Reds, Pinkos, party line members on every corner. Everyone's suspected. Everyone's guilty as sin. So picture it. My grandfather walks from Albany City Hall to his office at 82 State Street, and those who know his face cross to the other sidewalk rather than look him in the eye. Arthur J. Harvey, attorney at law, a pit bull of an intellect, flushed upstate, wearing a Brooklyn accent like a bullseye, sporting the thick hooked nose of a Russian Jew. In high school, they called him Heeb. Sheeny. I'ma knock your fucking teeth in, Jew. And as a civil rights defense attorney, they called him nigger lover, red, goddamn commie. See, before the world will call you a hero, you have to prove you're willing to bleed for your glory. So Pops spent his first day at Troy High School beating the sweet, holy shit out of the biggest, whitest, most Irish Catholic-looking kid he could find just to prove, Jew or no Jew, he was the toughest son of a bitch in the room. And as a lawyer, his tactics were pretty much the same. Find the biggest bully, call his bluff, and metaphorically speaking, of course, knock his fucking head in. May 9th, 1947, Paul Robeson was almost prohibited from performing at a local high school auditorium because the Board of Education suspected possible communist leadings, red, pinko, party line member. It was my grandfather, the nigger lover, who represented him pro bono and won. All rise. The Supreme Court of New York is now in session. The Honorable Judge I. Bookstein presiding. The Carver Cultural Society for Paul Robeson versus the Board of Education of the City of Albany. What say you? I say that in 1947 it was still perfectly acceptable to call a black man a Negro. And back then, when you labeled someone a communist, it was the kind of insult you slipped swiftly into ribs like a prison shank. It aimed to kill. So for Paul Robeson, being black, being an activist, and being an artist did not qualify him for the kinds of grants, awards, and accolades my African-American artist friends get nominated for today. No, in Mr. Robeson's time, it meant he endured the kind of blacklisting and censorship and threats of severe bodily harm we are very lucky we only have to write about. So what say you? I say this court case was one in a long line of court cases that made my grandfather and other lawyers like him more unpopular than a doctor at an abortion clinic in the middle of the Bible Belt. I say he represented Jews, ex-cons, and women when no one else would. I say he bought white houses in white neighborhoods and then moved his black clients in box by brown cardboard box. And I say he did it for free. I say he did it because it was the right thing to do. I say he did it because he was a tough son of a bitch, and he'd be damned if any bully, be it from high school, the Board of Education, or goddamn Senator McCarthy, was going to beat his ethics out of him. So when they tried to cancel Mr. Robeson's concert, my grandfather stood lonely on the side of the true American dream. He argued political affiliations and skin color weren't sufficient grounds for a breach of contract, and Bookie knew my grandfather was right. So Robeson got his stage that night. And despite rumors of riots, despite death threats, despite warnings from the Albany State Police that they would not protect them should the shit hit the fan, despite all that doubt, Mr. Robeson sang. He sang the way God had always intended him to sing. Freely. So picture my grandparents sitting in that auditorium, a dusty, rickety mass of wooden seats beneath them. My grandmother, white-knuckle gripping her man's hand, both of them holding their breath, both of them waiting for gunshots or the sound of sirens, but the only sound that broke the still air that night was Paul Robeson's baritone. busting out of his throat like the last prayer of a drowning man who has no choice but to throw his whole heart upward. I like to imagine that his songs filled up every molecule of wind for miles that night. I like to imagine that he filled up the whole city, the whole state. I like to imagine that that night the whole country was bursting open with the sound of hope and inspiration and true faith in everything this union was promised. Because throughout all of history, the world has always tried to silence its most powerful voices. But sounds like Mr. Robeson's, like my grandfather's, they're never ending, I think. I think once they're set in motion, their energy keeps revolving through the continuum of space and time the way a wave keeps rolling, no matter the shape of the moon. So even though Paul Robeson has long since hung up his hat, even though my Gramps is long gone from this realm, they are not silent. I know. Their two great voices are still ringing, loud and clear today, and every day, finally, I know they've been heard.